Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the Jews was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Cross the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Good evening, Alaskans. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is Oversight Live. I am Ben Carpenter, your host. My chair is rolling away from me. All right. What is Oversight Live? Well, Oversight Live is your road to Juneau because we don't have one. It's cost prohibitive, both in time and money, for people to go to Juneau and participate and ask questions and just generally be involved in providing oversight of our legislature and government. But because we don't have a road, that's not just a valid excuse anymore, because we've got technology that helps us understand what's going on. We just have to take the time to witness it and ask questions. Well, sometimes it's hard asking questions. So I spent 6 years in the legislature. I am very interested in helping answer your questions. So we're going to review some ongoing, some meetings, some things that have happened in the legislature that I think are pertinent and that you want to hear about, or you ought to hear about, even if you don't want to. And if you've got questions, you go ahead and chat them in your window. We're streaming on Facebook, X, and YouTube. And if you chat in the window, let me know what your questions are. I'll do my best to answer it. If you're watching the recording and you have a question, you can email me at producer@oversightlive.com. And I can do my best to try to answer those questions. If you've got a recommendation or an ask of something that you want to have explained on a show, go ahead and drop me an email and let me know on that, and I'll do my best to incorporate that in. There's a lot going on in the legislature, and we can't do everything, show everything in an entire hour. So got to prioritize things. We have been spending a lot of time on the pipeline project as it's being scrutinized in the legislature, and for a good reason, right? Everybody wants to know whether we're going to have this promise of low cost energy from the North Slope, and we're closer than we've ever been, I think. Looking at just reading the tea leaves here and looking at everything that's happening, it's closer than we've ever been. And I'm hopeful that we can find a path forward. Anyway, so tonight we are going to take a look at the gas line project. Senate Resources had a presentation today and asked some questions of a invited testimony. The individual is coming from a think tank in lower 48. And this think tank is R Street Institute. And I have never in my time in the legislature, I never had any interaction with R Street, and I wasn't super familiar with, I don't know what their purpose is and where they fall on the political spectrum and all of that, right? So I did a little bit of research. R Street Institute is a center-right, nonpartisan organization. It's a policy shop grounded in free markets, limited government, but it does avoid strict alignment with Republican Party priorities. It is self-described as nonpartisan. It has libertarian leaning stances on certain issues. It's economically conservative. It promotes deregulation and competition, but on issues like climate policy and voting access, it's a little bit more libertarian. The organization broke from a prior organization, and it kind of broke over this support for climate solutions. So this organization, K Street, is looking for market-based climate solutions, for example, carbon taxes, and some election reforms. So that takes it into the kind of libertarian field or area. It is staffed with center-right people. People have worked previously at Heritage Foundation and some libertarian organizations. Its funding comes from both sides. It's a mix, kind of a centrist funding. It's also taking some center-left money. And it kind of sits between what you'd recognize as a real conservative organization of the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute, which is more libertarian. It kind of sits in between those two, I think, is the best that I can judge. So this is the organization that Chair Giesel invited in to have a conversation. And one of the questions that's going to be asked and what they're trying to get at here is, what did President Trump just do with his executive order, his statement that potentially could impact the pipeline? And they're going to ask the question, hey, what are the odds here that the federal government, the Trump administration, is going to come in and nationalize this pipeline? Okay, so we're going to hear some expert testimony, some invited testimony from a center-right organization answer that question and much others, and many other questions tonight. So why don't we get started here?
Philip Rossetti. He is a senior fellow at the Energy and Environment Division at R Street Institute. So welcome, Mr. Rossetti. If you would introduce yourself for the record, we would welcome you.
Did I say R Street or K Street? I'm going to pause here. I hope that I said R Street. In my back of my mind, I'm thinking, did I just call it K Street? I don't think that is the case, but anyway, it is R Street. If you're curious why if I messed that up earlier.
Your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm Philip Rossetti. I'm a senior fellow for energy and environment at the R Street Institute, which is a public policy institute, so a think tank based in Washington, D.C. We specialize in free market policy, and I specifically focus on energy and environmental economics.
Very good. I invited Mr. Rossetti here today to talk about the Defense Production Act. He's written on this subject in the past and has some information to share with us about it. So I would welcome your discussion of the subject, Mr. Rossetti.
Absolutely. For basic overview, the Defense Production Act was first adopted in 1950. It was during the Korean War. It largely combined powers that had been delegated to the president under World War II as part of the two War Powers Acts that had been passed. The thinking was that it was necessary for the president to have the authority to prioritize certain contracts and activities in the private sector to facilitate national defense. A lot has changed since that time, and the Defense Production Act, as it was initially envisioned, had a number of authorities, including the ability to set wages, which many of those have elapsed. The current Defense Production Act now has two broad authorities that are typically used. One is called Title I authorities, which is the ability of the president to prioritize certain contracts for national defense. So this can be acquiring materials for weapons procurement and things of that nature. And then there's Title III authorities, which largely revolve around what's called the Defense Production Act Fund. The president essentially has a fund that he can use to subsidize and purchase and make loans to certain industries that are viewed as essential to the national defense. That explicitly includes energy industries. And this, the limitations on the president's use of the DPA fund, as well as these sort of interventions under Title III, require that there must be some sort of market rate compensation for these sort of subsidies, and that the federal Congress has to be notified. However, there is an exception to this, which is what is called Section 303A7, which permits the president to waive these requirements. So in effect, when the president waives these requirements, which the president did on April 20th, he is permitted to use the DPA fund for these purposes without adhering to these normal constraints. I'm happy to offer any insight I can on the DPA and how that impacts energy and environmental economics.
Well, thank you. Of course, we have a.
So there's a number of questions that the committee is going to ask here. And I think it's telling to kind of gives us a peek or a look into what questions, what thinking they have kind of behind the scenes. What is it they think the problem is as to what questions they're being asked, right? Where do they think this is headed? So I love listening to the question and trying to figure out from what vantage point you're asking the question. What is it that you're about that you need this information for?
Giga project proposed up here for a gas treatment facility, a pipeline, and a LNG facility. Estimated cost is $47 billion, which we think is rather low. But how do you see the Defense Production Act coming into play with a project like this? We know certainly that the president has, when he initially took office, named Alaska's energy as a priority for his administration, and we are interested in how the DPA may be called into play.
So there are a number of ways that the DPA could be used in this, and it is hard to speculate too much on what the president may or may not do. In this case, the authority has been delegated to the Secretary of Energy at the Department of Energy. But traditionally, the way the DPA is utilized in these situations is to provide grants or loan guarantees to projects to help them capitalize. Now, in the case of natural gas, where you already have a large capital investment in these projects, it's harder to know how much of a difference the DPA funds can make because they're relatively small in comparison to the total capital cost of these projects. Loan guarantees can cover a larger portion of that cost, and the scope of that depends somewhat on limitations and the estimated subsidy value of the risk of the project. But it is worth noting that the DPA, and especially in this case on April 20th, when the president invoked the DPA, does specifically permit the federal government to engage in offtake agreements. So there may be purchase requirements that are made and to facilitate that, but it is hard to know exactly what that will look like. Traditionally, these projects are in the tens of millions of dollars in terms of receiving DPA aid, and rarely exceeds $100 million. So for these sort of large-scale projects, I think we're starting to enter into some uncharted territory of how the DPA can be utilized. It's worth knowing that the DPA's 303A7 authorities are fairly recently to be used in such a manner. The Biden administration was the first to explicitly invoke 303A7 in such a manner, and their scope of application was relatively small. So it's hard to know, but it's also worth noting that under Title I authorities, prioritization can still be given if such projects are viewed as in the national defense, and the DPA does expressly permit the application of these authorities for projects that may be of benefit to our overseas allies. So to the extent that there might be foreign purchases of natural gas that are considered as important to national defense, that can still fall under the DPA.
Thank you. Senator Dunbar, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here again, Mr. Rossetti. So using the DPA for something like an offtake agreement or even a loan guarantee, would that impact the ownership status of the assets of the pipeline or the LNG facility?
So my understanding is that it would not impact the ownership because these grants should be given to a private company, or it's a prioritization of a company's private contract. Now, it's worth noting that there is also what's called Title VII authorities, which are not so much an application of authority under the DPA, but are actually a sort of liability limitation under the DPA. So if there is a requirement for a company to engage in contracts as part of the DPA, and they otherwise would have liabilities like antitrust liabilities, those can be waived as part of the DPA. And this was used, sometimes during disaster relief when FEMA would prioritize reconstruction, which of course necessitated allocation of materials towards such purposes, and alleviate that liability. In this case, I can't speculate too much on that because, again, this is relatively novel to be considering the application of the DPA on such a large project. But my initial reading of this is that it would not.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Rauscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you used, Mr. Rosales, you used the word compensation earlier. So I'm wondering, in this particular situation where it's not built yet, or it's still in a planning and it's still in a phase where they're putting the parts together, what at this point would be compensatable, if anything?
Again, that's something that is hard to know because it depends a lot on the specific project. But oftentimes the DPA can be used as part of a cost sharing, where a grant is awarded to a company and DPA covers a portion of those costs. There could be procurement costs, there could be purchases. The authority that's delegated to the Secretary of Energy in this case is fairly open-ended, so it'll be up to the Secretary to determine if and how such authorities would be used. But again, it's one of those situations where the letter of the law is fairly vague in that matter, and the historical precedent is pretty small to know. So a lot of this is kind of speculation as to what this might look like. And this is also one of the reasons I've largely cautioned against reliance on the DPA as a market tool, because of these sort of potential impacts in private sector capital allocation and how it influences their decisions.
So
Follow up.
So I was just wondering, compensation, is it something that you would have to ask for with an attorney? Is that how that works, to talk to, I don't know, whoever's in, you said it was the director of energy. Would that be the person an attorney would go to defending whoever believes they needed to be compensated?
So in this case, it would be up to the Secretary of Energy as to who is being compensated and what amounts. So it would not, my understanding of it is that would not necessarily be a requirement where an attorney would have to petition this. It would be up to the design of the Secretary, which could take the form of a grant. It could take the form of a loan guarantee. In times past, we do see that there's sometimes a direct collaboration between government and a private firm. So I'm not sure about the sort of specific procedures, but that's going to be whatever is created by the Secretary of Energy as part of the directive from the president to apply the DPA in this manner.
All right, thank you.
Senator Wilkowski.
Thank you. What would
I guess I also want to just point out, he was talking just a little bit about what could happen, and keep in mind that the organization that's briefing here, that the R Street, is an organization that generally doesn't agree with or want to see subsidies from the federal government to private industry. So from that perspective, there may be a little bit of bias because that's what they're they're about, right? They want to help reduce the amount of subsidies coming from the federal government to private industry, which largely I would support. Again, quite a quandary. Now that you're the beneficiary, or the state of Alaska might be the beneficiary of some kind of subsidy from the federal government, and that may be the only way to get the pipeline built. How do you stand on your principles with that, huh, Mr. Ben? Well, I think it's a really good point. Do we take what in essence will amount to debt money to subsidize this pipeline project that other Americans, I mean, through national security, they'll benefit, but they're not going to have natural gas coming from Alaska. I don't think they're going to be importing natural gas to the lower 48 anytime soon. So they're not benefiting. Future generations of taxpayers they're not benefiting other than through some sort of national security. So it's a really, really good point.
What you say is the likelihood of the federal government effectively nationalizing this $46 billion gas line project?
I would say low. I don't know enough about this sort of specific project to say what the administration may or may not do, but I can say that the potential impact of such an intervention into private sector decisions would be enormous, and it would almost certainly do more harm than good. And I would hope that there's a good understanding that such interventions into markets are going to sow the more long-term problems than they would resolve. Now, I think when we look at past utilizations of the DPA, probably the best sort of corollary is a time when the DPA was not actually used, which is when there was a refinery scarcity back in 2022, 2023. The Biden administration was considering, or at least talking about, using all of their available authorities to remedy such shortage, and they'd sent a letter to refiners to that end, which was, in my reading of that, was a potential application of the DPA. However, the DPA was not used in such a manner, and I would suspect that part of that is the recognition that those sort of interventions do not actually remedy scarcity. They simply transfer ownership and also have a deterring effect on future capital entry into these markets. So I would say it's very low. I'm also not
future capital entering into these markets. I'd like to flush that out if I was asking questions, because I don't know that there's a competitive market in Alaska for a pipeline from the North Slope. I don't think there's a marketplace for that. I think this is a one-off. This is a once in a lifetime type of thing. You don't build a second pipeline. There's not competition that comes in here and competes, right? So I'm not sure exactly what he means by that, because it's not a true market opportunity here. I mean, I get that you're going to be selling natural gas on the market, right? And it helps with a market opportunity in Alaska with natural gas going to the private sector. I understand that. But from the concept of is federal money going to come in to a single one-off, once in a lifetime project and influence how the rest of the market behaves? I don't know. I would like to better understand what he's saying there.
Sure if the DPA being used in such a manner would hold up in court because of the requirements for just compensation in other areas of the law. But again, this is the authorities under the DPA are relatively broad, so it's hard to know exactly where that authority ends.
Follow up. Other questions, Senator Kawasaki?
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Mr. Rossetti, this morning. The Fairbanks interior has a specific nuanced use of the Defense Production Act recently, in that we recently saw a mine come to Fairbanks. It's the U.S. Antimony Corporation, and we did a tour as they just announced that they were going to utilize the Defense Production Act to provide, I can't remember, like $250 million from the Department of Defense. And the reason was because antimony is a critical mineral used in hardening metals for munitions. And so this is a Montana company, came up to Fairbanks, is extracting this from the west side of the Fairbanks Mountains and then trucking it, I guess, down to Montana for refining. Are there other examples of that in which Defense Production Act was used, maybe to a minor degree? I mean, this is obviously a $50 billion project, and that was a $50 million project. But are there other examples you might be able to give us?
So I will say that there are several mines that have received DPA funding. If you're asking me for a specific example off the top of my head, I couldn't give you one. But also during the Biden administration, there were attempts to use DPA. I believe Mitsubishi might have received some funding for clean energy purposes. So this is relatively common in the sense that we're talking about like dozens rather than like single digits applications. But one thing to keep in mind is we see this more utilized in the mining space, not just because of the sort of capitalization issue, but because of the permitting difficulties that mines frequently encounter. So it's estimated that it takes about 29 years from mineral discovery to operation commencement to get a mine started in the United States. An argument for the utilization of the DPA in that case has been that the prioritization of a mine can help to cut some of that timeline. My sort of policy understanding, though, is if there are artificial reasons for that timeline, which largely boil down to permitting considerations and a lot of the National Environmental Policy Act's vagaries, remedying those is not only a surer path to accelerating the market entry of those resources, but also remedies the problem that we might have in the application of the DPA, which is that there are only so many projects that the DPA could touch. So there are probably projects out there that have a potential for market entry and a value to the U.S. economy, but they might not be eligible or likely to benefit from the DPA.
If I understood correctly, what he just said was it would be better, instead of using the DPA, if you've got policy or permitting hurdles for projects, that you would refine or reform the underlying legislation, underlying law as to why it takes so long, right? Which would take an act of Congress or multiple acts of Congress. And while I don't disagree, when has Congress shown that they can act to fix problems recently? That's like expecting our state legislature to act to fix problems. Only if it's in the government's interest, right? Like if all of the employees of state government want to have a pension, well, we can act to make that happen, right? But reforming government, whether it's improving regulations so that they don't put burden on the private sector, or reducing the cost of government. I mean, those are things that government doesn't do on a regular basis. Congress is not focused on that. So I don't know. I call me skeptical just a little bit. I don't disagree, but that's not an option for the president. Like he's not going to be looking at the pipeline project and saying, "Oh, look at these permitting problems." Well, that's already permitted, but other mines, for example, Congress really needs to fix that. Well, he's got 2 years left in his term, right? Maybe a matter of months before the House changes, House or Senate change, and then he doesn't have support at all in Congress. So using something like this, whether it's right or wrong, you can definitely see where the president would be looking for ways to make things happen in the waning months of having some semblance of power amongst the two branches of government. And maybe even three, because the Supreme Court's fairly conservative.
Thank you.
Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again, Mr. Rossetti. And, what's interesting about this project is they already have the permits, and they probably will need some additional permits at some point, and they, they'll probably get challenged, some of those permits. But the bulk of the permitting has been done at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars and a decade of work, So that's in hand. And so when the sort of specter of the DPA is used with regard to this project, it's got to be something different. It's got to be either the offtake agreements, like you were saying, or some infusion of capital. And so my question is, if it's applied that way, well, in prior cases where it might have been used that way, has anyone sued to stop it? And I'm not talking about people suing for their just compensation. I'm talking about, is there any third party that could sue to stop it? Who has standing to stop it, I guess, is sort of my question in a case like this.
Asking for a friend?
So that's a good question. And I'm not aware of any specific examples of that. Because when I think about some mines or projects that were held up because of litigation concerns and some potential legal liabilities, such as like Rhyolite Ridge, which is a lithium mine in Nevada, it seems to me that in those cases, the DPA was used to potentially mitigate some of those liabilities. But at the same time, the liability limitation is not it's not a blanket, and it's not extensive. So I would say that if there are, if a party has standing to litigate against this project in its current form, whether they're litigating against some aspect of the project, or they're litigating against the permit quality, or if we're talking about LNG exports, of course, there are also federal approval as required. So my understanding is that standing would still remain, but I don't think that the DPA's application, if it were to be applied, would worsen or increase a legal vulnerability.
Follow-up, Madam Chair. Follow-up. So what you're saying is there really is no one, except maybe Congress, I suppose, and they wouldn't use litigation, that could say, you are misusing the DPA, and we're suing you to stop using the DPA this way.
This is where I think you're getting into a very interesting policy question, which is that sort of limitation on the DPA's authority has rarely been explored. So the reading of the DPA, as I understand it, does grant broad authority, which it would be up to Congress to limit. I think the operative legal question is if Congress permissibly can delegate this authority away to the president, and to what extent that authority is given from Congress to the president. That's a legal question that, to my knowledge, hasn't been explored adequately yet. When I think about past times that the president has used a broad economic authority to intervene in markets, I think of what was called the Nixon shocks, which was back in during the Nixon administration. Price controls were set on wages and as well as on goods, and it led to a lot of inflation, or stagflation is what it was called at the time, and a huge amount of scarcity. But it was Congress that ultimately said this is not going to work, and they did not enhance or extend any of those authorities for the Nixon administration. So in this case, ultimately, Congress is the body that is responsible for limiting the DPA. But if the DPA was used in such a way, for example, as mentioned earlier, to nationalize a project, I would imagine that would certainly be ripe for a court case. And I think, I'm not a lawyer, but I would suspect that there would be a very strong legal argument to say that Congress had never intended the DPA to be utilizable in such a fashion. So it's that lack of definition and that lack of constraint on the defined scope of authority of the DPA that makes this such a challenging issue to tackle.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So a question asks, who has standing in order to stop this use of the DPA? Basically, if they disagree with how it's being used, right? So the assumption here, I can't give Senator Dunbar the benefit of the doubt and think he's looking out for the project and looking to see what could stop this from happening. And maybe we need to counter that because we really want the project to go forward. Like I can't give him that benefit of the doubt because they've already amended one bill. They've already amended the project out of one bill, right? And then they've added taxes to a second bill that would affect the project, the viability, right? So I can't give him the benefit of the doubt that says that his motives are supportive of the pipeline. The exact opposite is true. There's a fishing expedition here to find out, well, if we make the assumption that the Trump administration is going to do something we don't like, who has standing to prevent it from happening? Who can sue? That's what I read into the question. We don't know what's going to happen, but you're telling us that these certain things could happen. There's grants, there's loan guarantees, there's purchase agreements. All of those things could happen. And if we don't agree with it, or if somebody doesn't agree with it, who has standing to stop it? That's what our resources committee is concerned about. Well, one member on the resources committee doesn't give you hope that they're actually interested in a pipeline being built, right?
Other questions? So, Mr. Rossetti, we have a lot of military bases here in Alaska that are along the corridor of this pipeline. Fairbanks has an Army and an Air Force, as does Anchorage. And energy cost and availability is a huge issue. So it sounds like actually this DPA program could be used to partially move this project forward. Would that possibly apply?
The application of the DPA to move a project forward to facilitate the energy provision for military bases that is within the scope of the DPA. In fact, back in 2019, I believe it was, there was an attempt to use the DPA in such a fashion to force military bases to procure electricity from particular sources. At the time, that was something that I noted would be potentially problematic because it was based on technology types rather than any kind of cost of the resources or reliability considerations. So this is something where it theoretically can and probably could be used in that way. And there is some precedent for that. It's certainly up to the administration to decide what they believe is the most secure form of energy. And that is a pretty well tread legal area. But it's, yeah, I think that's probably the better way of thinking about it. To the extent the federal government has military bases, it is within their authority to say what energy they buy.
Thank you. Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's just an interesting point. And I don't think, Mr. Rossetti, we're not expecting you to know the sort of fine details of this project, but that would be a good argument for running a bullet line or some smaller diameter line to those bases. But that's not the project we're talking about. We're talking about an LNG facility, huge pipe, and a CO2 facility as well, none of which would be needed for those bases, but are needed for energy export. So it would be an interesting argument, but I feel like it'd be ancillary to the actual functioning of the project.
It's one of those areas where I agree with you completely. And I'd say that one of the challenges we have here is the criteria for applying these they're not always defined by reliability or some sort of metric. Oftentimes it's more about a strategic vision, which can change. And typically if the president is able to argue that, then it can be assumed that they have some authority to implement it. So again, this is one of the challenges with the DPA, that it has such a broad application.
We're talking military bases, and there's questions in the chat here about the proposed route in relation to military bases. So the pipeline does not go by either of the two close enough to have any sort of offtake. Okay, so the offtake would come from in the interior. I believe it would have to come from the Fairbanks offtake, I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm not, because I've never heard any conversation about the military bases up there in the interior having access to natural gas from this pipeline. That would 100%, I believe, come from the spur line that would get built into Fairbanks and then south from Fairbanks to the military bases. Anchorage is where the other military base is. It's on NSTAR's grid. So as long as the natural gas pipeline ties into NSTAR's grid, then NSTAR would provide natural gas to the bases down here in South Central Alaska. So it's not a case where the pipeline is adjacent. It is the case that the pipeline would provide the natural gas that the bases would use. Now, obviously, you would need to have a pipeline permitted and built for a spur line for the interior bases to be able to take advantage of this. And maybe that's one of the things that the DPA is looking at being used, because obviously they need a spur line to get natural gas to the interior bases. They're also building a nuclear, micronuclear plant up there, but having multiple sources of gas and a backup to the nuclear plant is probably something that's well within the military mindset here. If we can get gas, then we really do need to get gas. So I would not put it out of the realm of possibilities that the DPA would be answering the mail or solving the problem for the northern military bases as to access to the natural gas if this pipeline gets built. That could be one use of the DPA. Could be that the DPA is only going to be used for particular parts of the project, right? So DPA is not used for the pipeline project, but it is, or phase, right? But the second phase where you're putting in the LNG export facility, and I saw another comment up there that said we don't have the ability to export, no way to ship LNG to other markets. Christopher had said that. And you're right. We don't, well, I take that back. We do have the capacity. We have in the past shipped LNG to Japan for 40 years. And the facility down here in Nikiski is an export facility. There just isn't enough natural gas to compress and turn it into LNG and send it anywhere right now. So we do have, or have had in the past, that capacity to export LNG, but the plant isn't the size down here that would be necessary to deal with a large amount of gas coming from the North Slope in this size of a pipeline. So a reason why they would have to build new dock facility, new LNG facility, and everything to support the amount of gas coming in. But if phase one ends without a facility, right? It's just the pipeline gets to the east side of the inlet and doesn't come across to Nikiski, and there's not any connection to the location that's permitted for a facility, for an LNG facility, then the only thing that pipeline's doing is providing gas to NSTAR. And in that regard, you probably don't have a capacity to export gas through NSTAR to Nikiski. Then I don't see that would be a path forward. Maybe it is. I don't know. No one's told me that it isn't. But for the quantities that we're talking about, it's always been necessary for the LNG facility to get built down here in Nikiski in order to enable that export. So that is why they're talking about the military. With regard to the president and national security, one logical conclusion is he's talking about military bases in Alaska. This gentleman also already acknowledged that dealing with allies, you're talking Japan, South Korea, and any of the Asian countries that want to buy gas from us that are our allies, for a national security argument, that is another legitimate use of DPA. Now, the size or the scope of how it might be used is something that we're all just kind of speculating about, because we have no idea what the Trump administration, the Department of Energy, is actually thinking here, how they would propose to use this. But the question comes up, what if we don't like how they're going to use it? Can we sue? All right, I guess it's a good question, but coming from a committee that's not friendly to the pipeline, it doesn't give you hope. Like, wait a second, we're not interested in suing to stop the pipeline or stop this from happening, are we? Is that really what we're here for? All right.
Very good. Other questions, Senator
Yes.
Kawasaki?
So thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm reading the announcement about the DPA specifically. It cites, pursuant to Section 303 of the Act, the most cost-effective, expedient, and practical alternative method for meeting the need, which is this natural gas for ourselves and for our allies, is using this DPA provision. And it says it's mostly because of financing constraints, long lead equipment, construction schedules, and permitting delays. Does that sound reasonable to a person who's sort of has some experience in it, that the DPA could be used?
Hesitate to, yeah, thank you. I hesitate to use a judgmental word such as reasonable or not, but to get into kind of the economics of the question, the concern is if there is a demand for these goods without the DPA. Because if there's already demand, if you already have people who are buying natural gas, then they're already going to be funding these efforts, and the infusion of more capital doesn't actually remedy that. There's also the concern that it can actually lead to what we sometimes refer to as these like invisible victims in economic policy, where you have projects that otherwise would be profitable and benefiting under the current circumstances, but because they're not prioritized or permitted because of a government intervention that is aiding a different project, then we have forgone that potential benefit. So my recommendation from a policy perspective is it's always best to let the market determine that. And to the extent that you might have a genuine national defense need that is undercapitalized, I think that's a more compelling argument for such a policy. We see that with weapon procurements. There's not a profit usually in securing the national defense. That's more about the collective security that the government is intended to provide. But in the energy space, people do buy energy, and their profit motivation for efficiency and growth is already present.
Follow-up, Senator Kawasaki?
Yeah, just one last question, because the company that is involved, or the big company that's involved in this project in Alaska, is also involved in another project to deliver LNG, though on a different coast. It's the Gulf Coast area. So I guess does that have some relevance in the fact that they're doing a private project in the lower 48? There's this project that's competing. One project they don't need public capital or federal money for. This one they need a lot for. What do you think about that argument?
So what I think is that you've got a lot of time on your hands down there in Juneau to be thinking about trying to figure out what the Trump administration is going to do with regard to this DPA. Like, it's going to sort itself out. And the legislature here has really little say in it, right? It is kind of outside your hands. It's not in your jurisdiction. They're going to do something. The private enterprise can go directly and work with the federal government and not have to deal with you. Where they do have to deal with you is within this property tax structure or taxing structure that they have acknowledged needs to be addressed. So if you don't want to pass the bills that are sitting in your committee, then what you're saying is you're okay with importing LNG at high gas price, or building a pipeline at high gas price to the consumer, to us Alaskans, right? In either case, it's okay for us Alaskans to pay more for energy versus passing out a bill that reduces the government take in order to reduce the cost of gas to Alaskans. Whether, and in that case, that would usher in a pipeline, because if the alternative is not the pipeline, even if you pass the tax reformation and they didn't build a pipeline, you would still be, your alternative is either find it locally, which is going to be high cost, or import it, which is going to be high cost. So the only path forward here is for them to build a pipeline and hope at this point that the cost coming out of it per the builder is accurate and that it's going to be lower cost. If it ends up being the same cost, then there's no difference. Build the pipeline, pay high cost gas. Don't build the pipeline, pay high cost gas. What's the benefit to Alaska? You don't build the pipeline, you don't get any taxes from it. You build an LNG import facility, I guess you're going to tax the import facility as well, right? So either way, you're going to get revenue. Which one are you going to get more revenue from? Taxing the importation of LNG, which just increases the cost to us, or taxing the throughput of the gas line? No, instead, we're having a conversation about what the Trump administration might do. I mean, why focus on this? This is not a priority for the state legislature to worry about. When there's something to worry about, then there's something to worry about. Like after Trump has said, hey, this is what we're going to do, or Department of Energy has said, this is what we're doing, or this is the public comment period for what we're going to do, or whatever, right? However, they make their determination on how they're moving forward. Until then, everything here is speculation and a waste of time.
I just want to clarify in terms of the public capital being allocated to a project for a benefit.
Yes.
Right. So the from an economics perspective, I'm speaking as someone who works on this a lot. What we always want to be cautious of is what we call opportunity costs, because the government doesn't have money, it has other people's money. So every dollar that the government spends either must be paid for by taxing someone else or by taxing someone in the future, because the money is borrowed now, which is typically what is happening, which means they're paying for it plus interest. The lost opportunity for that dollar to be spent somewhere else is something that we have to weigh against the investment that is being made by the government in this case. And conventionally, we would say that the holders of capital are more efficient at identifying the productive uses of their capital rather than government is. It's something that we call the knowledge problem from Friedrich Hayek, an Austrian economist, who noted that no matter how smart government officials are, they operate under limited knowledge, and therefore they can't perfectly allocate resources. So in this sense, that opportunity cost is something that
I wish there was a dual camera here that I could watch the the committee members' faces as he's saying this, because they're here. This is like, we don't want to hear this. They are the government officials.
That is hard to know, but is still present. And that's why whenever we have an intervention like that, it is important to be able to articulate if there is a genuine market failure that is being remedied here. A market failure being essentially an economically productive opportunity that for whatever reason government hasn't, that the market hasn't prioritized, which might be national defense, it could be environmental reasons, et cetera. So that's where I kind of land on is look for the market failure, and that can tell you if the intervention is going to have a benefit or harm.
Super excited super excited that this guy was asked that question and came up with that answer. I wonder what the committee is going to respond.
Senator Myers.
Oh,
Yeah,
they're not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rossetti, appreciate you being here today. So basically what I'm hearing from you today is kind of the classical liberal economic viewpoint that with very few exceptions, it's a bad idea for government to intervene in a market. Is that largely correct?
Yeah, I work at a free market think tank, so yeah, we prefer
Guilty
free
as
market.
charged.
Yeah.
Okay, you get no argument from me on that one. I have some other government interventions that we have talked about here recently as potential policies that I was wondering if I could just run past you and see how you felt about them. I'm looking at 5 different ones right now, such as you require disclosure of business information to a legislator, but there's no penalty for the legislator if that confidential information is then disclosed publicly. We've got statutory deadlines for both the beginning and the completion of a large construction project, or it faces a tax penalty. We got price caps. What's worse, those price caps are not inflation adjusted. We've got legislative approval of contracts, including sales contracts. After the product in question has already been separated from government ownership, it's the government has already sold it to one party, and then it's gone to another party, and now it's the sale from the third party, and then publishing online ownership stakes, lenders and creditors, all kinds of contact information about them, notification of ownership changes, contact information and names of all persons from any of those companies with signing or negotiation authority, the publishing online the value of all of those ownership stakes and any potential changes, and then publishing online anybody that's buying anything from the project as well. Do those sound like reasonable government interventions to you or not?
Excellent question, Rob. However, I think there was too much in that question, and it's going to be difficult for him to give us a specific answer on each one of those. It really begs a longer conversation, and it may be a policy paper back from the organization on each one of those. But I'm dying to hear what he has to say.
So, give me a little bit more clarification on your question. Are you asking if those policies and applying to are you asking about a specific project or a sort of condition that government has imposed on private contracts, or under like a DPA funded project?
So those are policies that we're considering potentially here in the legislature as apply to our potential pipeline and LNG project.
Right. It's hard for me to make a specific judgment on that, because there is I think if you're talking about a normal sort of private enterprise where someone, like if I'm going to buy coffee, it doesn't make sense that my purchase of a coffee should be published. When we get into some of the concerns about like natural gas, you run into laws like the Natural Gas Act, which require essentially that there has to be a certain amount of information transparency that shows that there isn't a preferential contract award that's given. So I'd have to go through the specifics of the law to focus on that. But essentially, it's required that these projects are actually having a free opportunity for the access to the resource and the pipeline usually. So that's kind of my understanding. So I think I don't want to speculate too much on that, but I'd say from an economics perspective, having more costs associated with a transaction makes it less efficient, what we call transaction costs. and can have an economic toll. So to the extent that those should be minimized, I think that's appropriate. But I also want to be cautious about some of the other obligations that are unique to the natural gas industry. And sometimes there's a concern about what is the least cost way of facilitating requirements that they might have to comply with, which is, I'm not equipped to answer on that specific project, but I could look into that if that's something of interest.
So excellent question. Awful difficult for him to answer the whole question. But the point is not lost on the chair. I would hope that you've just invited a market economist, limited government market economist to testify, and your own amendments, your own committee substitute is not market friendly. Obviously, well, I don't say obviously. I hope she got the message there, Rob. There was a question here. So Rick, I wanted to pause and answer your question. Do they have to run the 42-inch pipeline all the way to the LNG plant? And I believe the answer is yes, because NSTAR or the existing pipe in the ground is not going to be able to handle the additional throughput from the pipeline. It would have to terminate in the LNG facility where they would deal with that gas coming to the facility. The distribution network that is currently in existence is not something that can handle that. So that is my understanding, is that the pipeline has to come across Cook Inlet and terminate where the LNG facility is going to be. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously the point from a free market perspective. And what we're trying to do is get government out of the way, figure out what tax structure works for government and for a project, so that the private industry can figure out how to move that LNG to market. And obviously that isn't ever going to happen if you don't have customers. So somewhere along the line, somebody has said already, we've got customers, we've got producers, and now we need to figure out the financials here to make the project work. A whole lot of doubt being cast out there, and a lot of people speculating that are not in the closed door meetings, that are not in the private industry, that are not responsible for moving this project forward, but who have an opinion about it. Whether they're experienced or not, it makes me like, no two projects are the same, right? So what happens in one 10 years ago or 20 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way it's going to be for this project. And this is a monster. This project is an anomaly, as huge as it is. So I don't know. I'm you just think about the people who are naysayers about what Elon Musk attempted to do. And I know it's not a real apples to apples comparisons between a major giga project of this type and what Elon has done with any of his companies. But just on the concept of somebody's got a vision and they're trying to make it happen. Elon, I don't know Glenn Farn. I don't know the people that are involved there. I don't know whether they are or are not of the caliber of Elon, right? But Elon Musk is able to do some massive things. And there's been naysayers along the way every time. And I'm just using that as an example to say, we've got naysayers for this project, but that's the case. You just always have naysayers. The people who are responsible, the people who are in the arena fighting the fight to try to get this thing built, they're the ones that really matter. Now, Trump administration, through the Department of Energy, has said, hey, we think we might be stepping foot in the arena. We've got this authority. Can any of this help move the project forward? and we don't yet understand what it is they're bringing to the arena. They're the only ones that can explain that. This subject matter expert, as conservative or as experienced or as whatever as he is, he's only making guesses. He's only giving his best advice. This committee is asking questions that are only going to come when the Department of Energy announces what it is that they have found is necessary or is beneficial to move this project forward. Obviously, Trump wants to see it move forward. So whatever beneficial to the project, that isn't talking to these guys. These guys don't want the project. Why would they come to the Senate Resources Committee and inform them of what's going on? They already telegraphed where they're at. So anyway, I'm getting off track here.
Okay, thank you.
You know, Mr. Rossetti, I was interested in your discussion about the knowledge deficit that government has, resulting in errors, right, in policies. And that's exactly the issue that we're facing in this particular project. I mentioned $47 billion. Well, we don't actually know that that's the cost.
It's not your project.
Because the information that we're receiving from the private sector developer is extremely limited. And yet the proposal before us is to completely eliminate all property tax for the duration of the construction and for 10 years after production begins. So it's a significant ask from our fiscal responsibilities, completely removing abatement of property tax is a huge loss of revenue.
I just want to, my head wants to explode. Current statute abates taxes for the first 10 years. The bill before them is just following what is currently in law. So even if you stayed with current statute and applied the 20 mil tax, it wouldn't apply during construction. So this argument that she's making with regards to the ramp up period and having to abate taxes and where it would take 10 years and well, that's current law. You don't have to do anything. That's current law.
To communities who will be impacted by a massive influx of workforce and materials. And so the transparency issues the transparency requirements we're looking at placing on this, it actually helps us in making decisions about policy related to our tax regime. So it's very complicated and probably unusual, probably something that you don't encounter a lot. You know, you talk about private sector. Well, it is a private sector company, but government is being asked to pony up a whole lot of money to make this private sector endeavor go forward. So just some information. Senator Dunbar, question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to bring it back a little bit to sort of where we started, Mr. Rossetti, about the DPA. And you'd said this would be a novel application of the DPA to essentially subsidize the construction of a mega project, as opposed to sort of commandeering existing resources or existing, private facilities. And I guess I'd like you to put a finer point on that. If the federal government did come in and somehow infused a tremendous amount of capital, would you see that, and it wasn't challenged, would you see that as an expansion of the DPA's current understanding? And I think you have an article, something about Pandora's box. So I don't want to make this too leading question, but the next president and the president after that, would they have a new tool on their hand to say, I don't know, build a gigantic wind farm or, anything else? Would this be an expansion for the next president?
Interesting question. Coming from a committee that's not interested in seeing this project go forward. Rick, you say that, no, they're not. I'm not sure you're responding to me, but he says he has a vision as a private enterprise. We have several people in government holding up a project that is beyond their scope. I believe that is why they are asking so many questions. They think they are going to be partially in control. Yeah, I think your last statement there especially is true. They do believe that they are in control, that this is their project. And because they're in resources committee, they're responsible for whether this project goes forward. As like they're the overseer. It's a private project. All the project is asking is for you to help us move it forward. The permitting's already done. The state has already asked them to build the project. And this committee thinks that they have the right to stand there and say, well, we actually don't want the project to move forward. I don't know, put it to a vote of the entire legislature, right? Like pass the bill out and put it to a vote of the legislature. Because I don't think that the opinion and the tactics that are being taken here in this committee represent all 60 people in the legislature. I don't even think that it's going to be a majority of the legislature. How many people can go back to their constituents and say, yeah, we want to add taxes and make sure this pipeline doesn't happen? We want to raise our hands and say, we're the ones that caused the pipeline to not happen. It's because we wanted more taxes. I don't think that's what the legislature is actually going to do. So they think they're in control. All they're doing is really standing in the way. If that's control, then fine. It's control. But you're standing in the way.
I would say yes. That's because when you look at the recent applications under the Trump administration of the DPA, that is actually what we're really seeing is the Biden administration and their expansion of the use of the DPA is essentially what leads the current administration to conclude that they can use it in a similar and perhaps even larger fashion. So to the extent that if these uses of the DPA are viewed as appropriate, and if Congress does not limit that authority, and if Congress continues to extend the authority of the DPA and continue to fund the DPA fund, then the next president will be able to use it. And we do see this trend, particularly in regulatory authority, where presidents tend to probe the limits of what is permissible in the interpretation of statute. And I think part of the incentive for that is when you are in the position of governing, then you're going to try to be using and expanding all the tools available to you. So there's a natural incentive for policymakers to do that. But I'd say that's the natural inclination. The more it's used, the more you're going to see a reliance and potential expansion of it.
If you caught the question from Senator Dunbar, he was asking if the next president would be able to use this authority if Trump does do something large here to build a solar farm or something, right? And I think this goes to the previous question Christopher asked. So I thought the feds were trying to remove the use of LNG in homes and businesses since it's non-renewable. And you're exactly right. Since the time that this whole Green New Deal came forward, when I was in the legislature and we started having to deal with it, right? The influx of money, the demand from industry for some kind of carbon sequestration process, right? All of the carbon management issue, all of that. It's all related. And it's because of this forced energy transition. We're not transitioning because there is an economic model, an economic thing out there, source of energy that makes more sense than natural gas, than oil, than fuel, fossil fuels, right? That thing doesn't exist yet. We want to say we need to transition away from it for a religious reason, right? We're all going to die because of climate change. And so we need to move away from fossil fuels. So natural gas is fossil fuels. We need to get rid of it. Okay. The reality is, even except for your very far religious zealots, except for those very far left, or I don't know if left is the right term, but except for your very committed religious zealots. Natural gas is the bridge. This is what the realistic environmentalists are saying. Natural gas is the bridge to get us from where we are now to no fossil fuels, because it's the cleanest version of of fossil fuels that we can use to get us there. We can't just flip a switch and go from where we are to solar panels and windmills and whatever clean energy we're calling it, right? I hope you can hear the skepticism in my language here, right? I'm helping paint the picture. That is what they want to see natural gas go away, but it isn't until they've had this energy transition happen, unless you're talking to a zealot, and then they just want the gas and all fossil fuels shut off, and we just stop using them, stop drilling, everything done. Okay, so yes, this is the goal. This is why the political party in Alaska, the Democrat political party, has asked President Biden, and has recently put forward in one of their party planks, their priorities, that we get rid of oil and gas development in Alaska. It's a political choice, right? That's their goal. So it's this energy transition. I think that has a lot to do with what's happening in this committee right now. You've got a majority of committee members who are bought into this energy transition and want to move things in the opposite direction. They want to they don't want a pipeline that's going to provide natural gas for decades and years. You can't turn it off. We gotta survive the Trump administration. Then we got to get back to this energy transition. Got to get a leftist a true believer in the White House and get a left-leaning Congress so that we can get this energy transition done. More federal dollars flowing into the state of Alaska, and we can shut down oil and gas industry and build windmills and solar panels. I'm not making this up. Okay, it isn't false of me to say this, because it's written. Like that's their goal. That's the environmentalists' goal, the greeny religious zealots' goal. None of this is new. There's different avenues and different ways that they're going about it. One of the most damaging is this private industry, private capital, telling private industry that they have to manage their carbon footprint or they're not going to get access to capital. Those religious zealots, they exist there as well. That's what's leading the conversation into this carbon management issue, right? The gas pipeline is being held up because of some ulterior motive here. If it was just low-cost gas, if it was just a decision point on where the right taxation is, well, you can have those conversations. You wouldn't need to be talking about the DPA. You wouldn't need to figure out what the Trump administration, you would just figure out what it is that's right for Alaska for taxation and pass the bill and establish it. Go into executive session and get the information that you need from Glenfarne so that you can claim that there's transparency happening, and then pass your bill. We don't need to have this conversation. Sarah, thanks for participating tonight and sharing your well thought out thought here. You say you can't be the only Alaskan who's embarrassed watching these committees stall progress and fumble what should be straightforward work. Lack of urgency, understanding, incompetence, accountability, it's hard to ignore. It's obvious to see some of these politicians have such a disconnect from what's actually at stake for our state. Thank you for explaining. No, thank you for joining and listening and participating. You're welcome. You're obviously getting my bias, right? I've said this before. I'm a fiscal social conservative, free market guy. I want to see this pipeline succeed. I don't want a pipeline to get built if it's going to saddle the state or the federal government with a whole bunch of debt and a whole bunch of public, right? I want this to be a free market solution. Thus far, it's been labeled and moving forward as a free market solution. Having Trump come in, the Trump administration come in with some threat, if you will, or some promise of federal help, up until this point has all been a conversation about loan guarantees, which is basically an underwriting that if the project fails, the people who loan money can go to the federal government and get their return. They get their money back. It's kind of like we do with our bank accounts in the FDIC. You put money into the bank is insured by the federal government, and if the bank goes upside down, the federal government, FDIC, is going to step in and give you your cash. So that's, from my understanding, that's what the limitation or the help that the federal government has been available to do or available to want to do with this project. I don't have a problem with that. If the Department of Energy is going to come in and say, hey, we're now going to drop down $40 billion of taxpayer money to fund the pipeline, then obviously it's not economical. It would be no different than a solar farm going in Alaska and requiring federal money to make that happen. It's obviously not economical. So if it's not economical, let's cease and desist this conversation about this pipeline project, and let's turn our attention to how do we get gas out of Cook Inlet, because we're going to need gas. And I'm adamant that importing LNG and paying for jobs in Canada to go get LNG in Canada is the best thing for Alaskans. When we've got LNG here, we just have to go get it. You know what it means? It means the cost of cost of gas is going to go up. But that's what it means. So do you want, and either way, whether you're importing it or whether you're going and finding it in Cook Inlet, it's going to be more expensive. So do you want to be benefiting jobs in Canada, or do you want to be benefiting jobs here locally? It only makes sense for us to go find the energy. I mean, we're more self-sufficient, for crying out loud. If it's nothing other than we don't have to rely on another thing for some outside entity to provide us with energy. If that's what this means, if that's what the Trump administration coming in and flopping down billions of dollars of grant money to make this happen, well, then it tells me the project's not economical. To be consistent, you don't do that. You don't, and that money's not completely taxpayer money. That's debt. It's money that future generations are going to owe. We don't need the government stepping in and funding uneconomical projects. We don't. We also don't need a legislature standing in the way of an economical project. So let's figure out whether it's economical. Put your bill through. Let's find out if it's economical. I think this committee meeting's about over.
Well, I'll just say, Madam Chair, the metaphor I have used I've heard used for executive authority is velociraptors testing an electric fence. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Rossetti, for joining us today. Appreciate your input on this. And
interesting in my research of our street. I'm going to bring something else up here. Let's get this off the share screen there. I'm going to show you something else here, because the governor vetoed the election bill. Sorry, changing subjects here. Move from gas line to election stuff. Okay. One of the things that our street does from this center right libertarian, they're looking at election integrity. Okay. I'm not sure I agree with everything that they've put forward here, but I'm sorry. I got to share it with you before I bring it up. So got to move it screens here. Okay. All right. Add to stage. Okay. What I want to show you is a document that they provided, or they produced here. And it appears that it was produced before the previous election, the 2024 election, just reading through it. Okay. So I understand maybe we're wasting time here because the election bill has already been vetoed, but the process isn't over, because there's going to be a conversation in the legislature right now as to whether they're going to override the governor's veto. All right. So this organization puts forward some conservative principles for building trust in elections. Okay. Right off the bat, they're recognizing that if you keep harping on the elections were illegitimate or stolen, then it continues to erode trust. I can understand that from a leader perspective. We don't want to keep talking about the negative thing. We want to fix it and move on, right? Their recommendations here are basically to do better at communicating, publicly affirm that the elections, that the security and integrity of elections across the U.S. are good, and avoid actively fueling doubt about elections in other jurisdictions. Okay. Use transparency and public outreach to reassure voters of election integrity. All right. I get that. From a leader perspective, you want the public to know that the people who are in charge are taking election integrity seriously, and we're going to make sure that it's secure, right? Number 3, champion policy changes. Like, this is the do things, right? Champion change, change things that can help build trust in our election system. Okay. So it's not just, we're just going to say that it's okay and not do anything, right? This group says, help communicate and tamp down the emotion in the room, if you will. Dare I say misinformation, but at least tamp down the emotion and the vitriol that's happening out there, and then find some solutions that are going to help build trust. That's what I see champion policy changes. Okay. That's the principles. Okay. So when they're talking about publicly affirming the security and integrity, they're saying, do affirm the common rules and practices in place to protect, right? Be transparent about minor inconsequential errors. Okay. I get it. That makes sense. Don't raise doubts about elections in other states or jurisdictions without substantial evidence. I think that the people within a certain state need to take this seriously for their own state. And I will speak to this just briefly. There are states that use election machines without paper ballots. And when those election machines get labeled as election machine, and it gets translated through social media to another state that uses an election machine, but it's a paper ballot election machine, the two are not the same thing. But the public ends up talking about it as just election machines. And now there's errors being committed amongst the population because you're talking about two different things. But people are ignorant. They don't know, because I didn't use that election system. I'm just assuming that it's the election system that I used. Okay. So I get it from that perspective, because I fielded the questions while I'm in about machines that we don't use. All right. So mind your own business. That's what I see this is. Don't raise doubt about elections in other areas. Mind your own business. That's what I would say. Alaskans need to take care of Alaskans' elections. Californians need to take care of Californians' elections. And if we both do that, then we've got election systems that work. To the extent that somebody's not taking care of it, well, then I think that becomes a federal issue, because when you're voting on national elections, if California is engaging in malpractice, for lack of a better word, of fraudulent elections, well, that affects us all. So it becomes a federal issue at that point. But Alaskans should concern themselves about Alaskans' elections. Use transparency and public outreach to reassure voters. Okay, this is helping communicate. Champion policy changes. Okay, this is the what should we do? Champion policy changes that can help build trust. All right. It doesn't say get rid of absentee voting. It doesn't say get rid of early voting. Okay, those are not things that this conservative organization is putting forward as what we need to do to engage in trust. Do you think that I'm just thinking of any of the successes in other states of saying, you know what, we're just going to get rid of absentee voting or mail-in voting, and we're just going to go to all same-day voting? Like, I'm thinking about, has that been successful anywhere else? If you know, please bring it up. Somebody said make it bigger. I don't know if I can. Let me see. Okay. Oh, that wasn't somebody. That was the missus. All right, honey, I made it bigger. Sorry. So one of the things that it highlights here is the processing of absentee ballots. So one of the problems that we see in our elections and why we complain about them is because after election day, it takes forever for us to know the actual results of the election, and the election results on election night get announced, but absentee ballots weren't counted. They weren't part of that announcement. And so then there's this perception that, well, something's nefarious because the counts that get announced 7 days later when the absentee ballots are counted, or 2 days later, whatever the time period. Now the perception is, well, something's wrong. Somebody's did this fraudulently because the numbers were, I was winning on election night and now I'm not winning. It must be fraud. Okay. My argument is that all the ballots should be counted by election night, and the results should be known on election night. Well, one of the recommendations here is pre-processing of absentee ballots before election day. Well, that's what one of the provisions in this bill that the governor vetoed was to extend the day, add days before the election that absentee ballots could be counted. Okay. So they get counted up earlier so that you have an absentee ballot count on election day. Makes sense to me. Pre-processing ballots also gives voters more time to address procedural issues with their ballots. The governor highlighted in his veto that he didn't agree that witness signatures should be improved upon in a ballot curing process, because you need to have somebody there to witness what's happening. So if the witness signature had failed, well, then you would have to recast the ballot in order, if I'm understanding his position correctly, you would have to recast the ballot with the witness and the voter present. How do you fix that going forward? I think it's a legitimate question. I don't understand the answer, but the point here is, let me go to the next section, which was also in the bill that was passed or vetoed. Passed and vetoed. States can also provide voters with confidence that their absentee ballots will be counted through the use of online tracking tools. Here's the issue. And I'm in Afghanistan. I'm in Iraq. I don't know if I voted in Afghanistan, but I voted in Iraq. I submitted my absentee ballot, and I remember thinking, well, I've got enough time that I think it's going to make it back to the States, but I'm not sure whether my ballot is going to be counted in time for the election. I don't know whether it will or not. I put this ballot in the mailbox on some fob in Iraq, and I have no idea whether that ballot got to Alaska? I have no idea. I have no way of knowing. I have no way of checking. Many states, this organization here says most states already provide a service. With statewide tracking tools, and the remaining states could help reduce confusion or improve voter confidence among voters. So if you're going to have absentee ballots, track whether the ballot has been received and communicate to the person who sent the absentee ballot that your ballot's been received. I don't think that's unreasonable if we're going to go the route of allowing absentee ballots. It doesn't mean that I want to see all absentee, like mail-in voting completely. No, I don't. But I do want to have, like, I'm in Iraq, I want to be able to vote. So I can't just jump on a jet and come home for election time. There's business reasons why I have to be out of town for an election. And so there's got to be a way for me to cast a ballot for that election, right? So I'm not in favor of getting rid of absentee voting. But what I do want is absentee voting to be as transparent and as trustworthy as possible. And I'm telling you from personal experience, I've casted absentee ballots and I have no idea whether they were actually received and counted, because our state does not track. There's no system to track whether my ballot has been counted or received and counted and then communicate back to me. The bill that our legislature and the governor vetoed, that passed and vetoed, would have required that to happen. This ballot curing issue where I forgot my voter ID number on the ballot is only possible if you're tracking ballots. Otherwise, I forgot my ID number and that ballot gets thrown out. I don't know it. I never knew that it got thrown out. The only way that I would know that it gets thrown out is if somebody is questioning that ballot in a recount situation and would know to contact me and ask whether I wanted to cure this ballot or not. And there's a process for doing that now, but it's going to a committee and a group of people. I don't know whether it's a committee, but it's going to a group of people in Division of Elections and fixing it. But you don't know it unless during a counting process somebody identifies me. So it's not something where I can go and check. Anyway, voter ID. Instill voter ID policies that use voter ID policies that instill confidence among voters, right? The concept of paper, like bills that show your address and your name on it, that could be printed up and look official but aren't, right? I think state IDs are the way to go. In this election bill, they removed the paper that you can use ID from a bank statement or a utility bill. That's the word I'm looking for, a utility bill, as proof of residency and proof of who you are to go vote. But allowed native IDs, tribal IDs. Okay. Some villages, tribes are the only IDs that they have. They don't even have automobiles. They don't drive. So is that the right thing? I don't know. But if we were using bills before to say of who I am, doesn't seem like a tribal ID is that greater risk. Anyway, point that I'm getting at. We have an opportunity to do something to make some improvements to our election system, and we're not going to, because it doesn't do the things that we think we want to do from a conservative point of view. We want to eliminate automatic voter registration. That's what we should do. That's what we want. That's what I want to do. I do not want people to be automatically registered to vote when they go register for a PFD or apply for a PFD. Okay. That is the center right perspective. The center left perspective is the opposite. They like the automatic voter registration. Okay. Our current legislature does not have enough votes to change the status quo. We do not have enough Republicans or conservatives in the legislature in power to make that happen. So you can cry and complain that isn't in this bill. It was never gonna be in the bill. And here's the truth. June 1st of this year, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's June 1st of this year is the deadline to file for office. So June 2nd, I'll have a pretty good idea of whether we're going to have any chance of having conservatives or Republicans, whatever you want to call them, the center right group of people in the legislature to be able to accomplish that. I'll be able to look at, just based on my experience, I'll be able to look at who's running and what are the odds, or just get a gut feeling of who's going to win that election. Maybe they're running unopposed, right? I mean, so you'll get a pretty good idea June 1st as to whether we're even going to have a remote chance to have a slim majority of Republicans, conservatives in the state in charge to get what we want. The odds are that's not going to happen. The best that we're going to do is have a narrow margin where we need Democrats and Republicans to work together. That's not because we're not electing more Republicans than Democrats. It's because of who's getting elected. Throw out the labels. It'll just become clear based on who's running as to whether we're going to have. We don't have that now. So you can throw a tantrum about the fact that certain things didn't get done. And what that really means is you aren't understanding the dynamics of what's happening in Juneau. You don't understand who's sitting in the seats in Juneau because you're expecting something to happen that isn't possible. You don't have the votes to do that. So would you like to know whether your absentee ballot is actually received and counted or not? If you would, then we can get that done. We can't do the other thing that we want, but we can do that. I'm frustrated at the apparent lack of leadership and lack of strategy on trying to accomplish something. And more times than not, no. I can very confidently say every time. Make this big so you can see my face. Every time that we have a conversation within a caucus in the legislature, it is far easier for all of us conservatives to be on the same page about what we don't like, what we're going to oppose. Very rarely, if ever, can we agree upon one thing that we want to stand for. You want a bunch of people to stand for eliminating automatic voter registration? Then those people have got to sign up by June 1st to get elected. Because you don't have it right now. You have more Republicans in office, and the Republican Party says they want to get rid of it, and you've got more Republicans elected, but you don't have enough that are going to vote for it. Otherwise, it'd be done. What we can do, what the battlefield will allow us to do, is one thing. What we want to do, but the battlefield won't allow us to do that, is a completely different thing. And there are people who are very loudmouth looking at the battlefield that they think they want to have and say, well, why don't we get that done? And if you can't do that, don't do anything. Okay. That's a strategy, but I don't think that's the best strategy. That's not a good way to govern. Willie Keppel, thanks for joining us. The bill's BS. If your vote isn't there by the close of polls, your vote shouldn't count. Thank you for making my point. Appreciate it. Willie and I are friends. Okay. I completely agree with you. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see that the day after the election, the only thing that's happening after that is an audit starts. Let's make sure that the election was conducted appropriately. It's transparent. Okay. We can trust the election. Day after the election workers are like, okay, glad that's done. Now let's begin the audit. We're not still counting. We begin the audit. Everything needs to be received and all the votes need to be cast by election day. You need to be responsible and get your votes in. Okay. Another reason why when you send your absentee ballot in, I'd like to know whether it was received or not. You don't have enough votes in the legislature to make that happen, Willie. You can want it to happen and you can say that that's what should happen, but it isn't possible. That isn't the battlefield that you're sitting on right now. There's a saying in the Army that says you go to war with the people and the equipment you have, not the people and equipment you want. I'm limited when I go to fight a battle. I'm limited on what I can do, not what I want to do. I'm limited on what I can do based on the people I have and the equipment I have. Sure, I'd like to have a tank come in and knock the enemy over, but I don't have a tank. I just got a squad of infantry. I'm limited. So you'll throw out this bill, even though it allows us to improve the absentee ballot process. You'll throw it out because it doesn't end the election on election day. You never had an opportunity to end voting on the election day. You don't have the right people in the legislature to make that happen. If you did, I would be right there to support it and say that's what needs to happen. From my perspective, I would think that that's going to be the best policy for the state moving forward. Get your vote in on the election day. It's not election week, it's election day. After that day, it's done. That isn't possible unless you send the right people to make that happen. And I'll tell you on June 2nd whether you're going to have that or not. I'll have a pretty good idea. So June 2nd, 2 years ago, we lost the opportunity for that to happen. It could never be in the bill. They don't have the votes for it. So is that how conservatives are going to govern? We only do. This is the concept of incremental change. Okay. If I can make change in the legislature this year, it means I can make change next year. And I can make change the next year after that. Many times human nature says, you know what? I don't like change. I'm not going to do anything. And then through discussion, you get acknowledgement and okay, maybe I'm okay to change just a little bit. We're talking human nature here. Okay. Tell me I'm wrong. People don't want to change. Have a really good argument and okay, we can change on this one thing. All right. We got agreement amongst 21 Republicans in the House, 11 Republicans in the Senate that we've got change that can happen on this one thing. You don't have agreement that change will happen on everything, but just this one thing. But we're going to throw the bill out because we couldn't all agree on the big thing. We could only agree on the little thing. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of what is happening on the battlefield, in the legislature, in the process that we're engaging in self-government. It's a fundamental misunderstanding. You want things that aren't there. I would love for them to be there. They're not there. Appreciate it for you showing up and listening to me, Rick, and for participating, asking your questions. I really do. I'm also, my skin is very, very thick. You can tell me I'm full of it. I can handle that too. We can agree to disagree. You can also start your own show. I mean, yeah, I get it, Willie. You've run for office quite a number of times. Maybe getting elected is not your thing. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe the time's not right yet. I don't know. I do know that you being in the process means people are hearing from you every 2 years when you're running for office, right? There's value in that, if nothing else. I'm looking for questions here. Oh, this Corey's got a question that I missed. Does the committee have a professional LNG advisor to assist with any of this conversation? Funny you should ask, Corey. Hope you're still here. The legislature has paid for hundreds of thousands of dollars for a consultant to advise on oil and gas related issues for the legislative session. We've already previewed, we've already had that, we've already witnessed or reviewed that committee. And what we learned is that consultant, the company, Gaffney Klein, is owned by Baker Hughes, which is a partner in the LNG project. So the Senate Resources Committee is not super happy with having Gaffney Klein come in. And Gaffney Klein has been the consultant in the legislature for decades. Here's what I learned as chair of LB&A a couple of years ago. And Legislative Budget and Audit Committee has the responsibility for implementing the contracts for these consultants. Okay. I put a request for proposal out for new consultants because I said, you know what, we got this LNG project coming up. We really need some advice, and there's lots of questions here that need to be answered. So let's figure out who we can have as the consultant come in and educate us. I got one response. Went through our procurement process, and I got one company to respond. You know who that company was? Gaffney Klein, because they have been the consultant for the state of Alaska for decades. Now, there's value and risk with that, right? They have institutional knowledge of what's going on in the state of Alaska. They understand and have went through multiple iterations of tax policy, and we have a very complicated tax policy. So they're intimately aware of what's going on here in Alaska. But that's also a risk because they're not bringing new thinking to the table, right? You hire a new consultant who's looking at things just a little bit different, and maybe there's some value in having new blood in the conversation, new thinking in the conversation. Okay, I only got one company to respond. Alaska's a small place. It's a small market. we're a legislature that's not very trustworthy. Who wants to get involved with the Alaska legislature? So now we have a conversation about an LNG pipeline that our own consultant is compromised. Let's just say that. I think that's probably another reason why you're seeing other consultants being brought into Senate Resources, because they are not comfortable with Gaffney Klein being the only advice that we're receiving. And frankly, I mean, I can see the argument. How do you know from a realistic position, how do you know that Gaffney Klein is not being influenced by their parent company that wants to see the pipeline go through? How do you know? You don't. You don't. If you're sitting in the legislator seat and that's your only subject matter expert, in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, thanks for telling me that, but I know that you are owned by a company who wants to see this go through. So is that coloring the information you're giving me? It's a legitimate concern. Gaffney Klein will come in and say, well, that's not a concern. We've got firewalls and we don't share information and we've got procedures in place and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, okay. That takes a lot of trust. And I would feel a whole lot better if we had a different consultant that didn't have that bias, that didn't have that potential conflict, right? I mean, that's a legitimate position. So yes, we have seen them in giving briefings already. Callan is a consultant that is not consulting on oil and gas. Callan is consulting on investments. That's another consultant that we've seen quite a bit in the legislature. Anyway, I don't care whether this election bill gets veto overridden or vetoed. I don't care. It's irrelevant to me at this point. It is small potatoes. And here's the thing. With the limited amount of energy that I have, I know that each one of you that are participating here, you also have a limited amount of energy. You wake up in the morning and there's only a certain number of things that you're going to be able to focus on in the day. Same thing happens for the legislature, except by the end of the legislative session, that number of things that you can focus on shrinks. But the amount of things that you have to focus on expands, because everything's getting funneled at the end to try to pass things before the end of the session, especially in the second year when the legislature is going to sine die and be done and all those bills die. Everything gets compressed. Everything speeds up. The pace at which bills are moving through committees, going to the floor. There's so much information being crammed in front of you that your ability to focus and prioritize becomes very, very difficult. We've got a defined benefits bill that is going to bankrupt the state. And we've got an oil pipeline that could help reduce costs or at least provide long-term supplies of gas to us and to other nations, right? Both of those are big deals. Well, we don't have to worry about defined benefits. It's now on the governor's desk. Now we've got a pipeline bill that's what is going to step in the way of the pipeline bill to distract people from trying to find the solution to this. There's 300 bills, over 300 bills out there. And just like you think about that for a second. You, me, we're not superheroes. We can't focus on 300 bills. It's impossible. Okay. Cut it in a third. Can you focus on 100 bills? No, you can't. What is the priority? And this is this goes to leadership, right? You want the Republicans, you want the caucus of conservatives. I get tired of calling them Republicans because it doesn't even make sense anymore. You get the caucus of conservatives together, the group of conservatives together, and you want them individually to focus on the same thing to try to accomplish something, right? But each one of them's got 10 or 15 things that they're trying to juggle. And nobody's leading. What is the priority for the leaders in the legislature right now? I'm saying the people that get elected, majority leader, minority leader in both of the bodies. What are the priorities? What are they trying to accomplish? Well, in the minority, it's pretty slim. There's not much you can accomplish because you're in the minority. Okay. This is the point that I'm trying to get to is leadership is about taking complex things and narrowing them down to simple things so you can make a decision, so you can move forward, so you can focus on what really matters. The election bill, it is not relevant. We can conduct another election without the election bill and we'll be just fine. We can't go another conversation without go another day without having this defined benefits bill vetoed. Okay, that's what we need to focus on is how do you maintain a veto of this defined benefits and still get a pipeline bill, because we really need a pipeline. Of all of the things to prioritize, those two are some of the most important things. I got elected 3 different elections. If there's fraud in the elections, then how did I get elected? Because for sure and for certain people in the legislature didn't want to see me come back. I can, for the most part, trust the elections. Okay. Would I like to see improvements? Yes. What I absolutely need the legislature to be focused on is getting low-cost energy to the private economy in the state of Alaska so that we can have economic growth. I absolutely need that. You absolutely need that. You need them to focus on that. To the extent that we can provide leadership to our representatives is by peeling off the demands, because they are overwhelmed. They are incapable of dealing with all of the different things that are coming up. It is a complete distraction. So you and I can help that by peeling away the things that we're like, that's great, but it's not a priority. That's nice to have, but it's not a priority. What I really want is low-cost energy, because that's eating me alive. It's stopping growth of our economy. It's why my kids are leaving the state, because the economy is not growing. Everything's going to improve if we've got lower cost energy. We got to be able to help our legislators by not demanding 100 things. Just demand one. Let them focus on the one thing. Everybody goes to the legislature. All the members go to the legislature, and they are representing 18,000 people back in their district. And they're expected to bring something back to their district that says, hey, I did something for my district. And that means they're at the legislature focused on what I can get for my district. And it is very rare that you have a group of people that are going to agree to focus on something that's benefiting the state as a whole. That's one of the challenges with a long-term fiscal plan. That's one of the challenges with this pipeline project, is that people are focused in very narrow, district-centered, special interest-centered priorities. Send the right people down, make good priorities, better priorities than what we've got. You want to change what's happening in the legislature so that you can actually have an election bill that does what you want it to do? You got to be able to do both of those things. Send the right people down and prioritize your efforts. You got to know what you want. I'm telling you that in 6 years, even when we were in the majority, we did not know what we wanted. We did not know what we wanted. We could not agree on what was going to be our focus for this legislative session. we didn't have a true Republican majority, but are you ever going to have that? What if Chuck Kopp is your 21st vote and he agrees to be in your majority? He's no more Republican than one of the other Democrats. Right? The labels don't matter. It's whether you've got enough votes to focus on the thing that you need to focus on. If you can't focus on one thing, then don't expect, if your leaders cannot communicate that this is the priority and this is what we're going to be doing, then don't expect them to get other things done because they can't focus. They can't agree. The best you can do is stop bad things from happening sometimes. You got a bill, you got an election bill that does good things. Okay. You don't have the votes to stop the bad things. Okay. Well, then veto the bill and we'll just do nothing again. Got to know what you want. You got to have your elected leaders know what they want. And if you're not willing to step up and volunteer and take the heat, then don't criticize the people who are trying to do it and doing the best job that they can. Anyway, that's it for tonight. I appreciate everyone participating and the questions. We'll be back tomorrow night. We'll see what happens with with the resources conversation. I'm not holding out hope right now that Senate Resources actually wants to see this bill move forward. And I think it's going to take some extraordinary effort outside of the legislature to make it happen, make something happen. It's scary to me that we get so close and then our own legislature scuttles the project. All right, folks, we'll have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow, 7 p.m. Thanks again for participating.